Hi, I'm Zach. Welcome to the Ranger Cabin. Wedlidi Speck is a hereditary chief from Alert Bay, British Columbia, and a good friend of mine who I respect deeply. Wedlidi is Kwakwaka'wakw, Nuuchanulth and E'iksan, which is one of the four main tribes found in the Comox Valley, where I was born and raised. And I'm very passionate about learning about the land and people around me, while hopefully learning a little more about myself along the way. Wedlidi is the head chief of the Gixsam namima of the Kwaguł tribe. He's a spiritual leader, a knowledge keeper of history, traditional protocols and practices, and one of my favorite people to trade stories with. And whenever Wedlidi and I chat together, we like to go deep and wide on a range of topics. And today, Wedlidi explains different aspects of Indigenous culture, and specifically about something I'm very curious about, which is rites of passage. This is the first of a three-part discussion. I hope you enjoy it. Leave your comments. Courageously share your new knowledge with your friends and family. Most importantly, keep your fire hot. This is the Ranger Cabin. In the Comox Valley, we have, four main clans, and you come from E'iksan. Yeah. What is E'iksan? What is that?
Okay, historically, the ancestor was called E'iksan, and his ancestor came from the sun, and it came down in the Campbell River area, and the territory was named after the ancestor, so it was the territory of the E'iksan. And so from there, the marriage took place and family grew, and people started coming together, and so the territories of all the descendants of E'iksan, they ranged from Campbell River, the watershed, all the way down to Point Holmes. It was a big group, and there's 5 clans or 5 houses that make up the E'iksan. And just so you understand, when I talk about E'iksan, that's the ancestor.
Yes.
And when you add the E, E'iksan means that they're the plural form, that they're the E'iksan.
Ancestors, people.
Ancestors, yeah, the people. Yeah. And so so that's our family. And so the I have all these really beautiful stories of my grandmother when they moved south, they used to go out and fish, actually, and harvest with the Frank family. And they went down to Halliwell Park area and the south part of that, and they would do their summer fishing there. But there was a lot of different places. Like we also went to Miracle Beach. There's a beautiful little creek there that has salmon. And then they would go up to Willow Point and then Campbell River. But when the Leakwilta moved south and occupied Campbell River, there was less of an appetite to go there. But the Llamato Thumb is the name of Campbell River, and it means the place of houses. But really, when you think about the house as a symbol, as a concept, the house is the ancestor. And when we look at the place of houses, it's actually the place of ancestors. And so when we look at that, is that those people who understand the metaphorical nature of language, we see that where the house and the ancestor are inseparable. The doorway, if your house like E'iksan, their name is Tagum Chemos, which means it's sun on the face. Mm-hmm. And so when you look at like a raven house would be Pa'a Chemos, a raven on the face. They all named their houses that way because that's the ancestor, right? And so. And the symbolism that when you walk into the house, you go in and you're swallowed up by the ancestor. And it's a way of describing that as you go from a secular world to the ceremony, that your secular nature has died in order for you to be now in the spiritual realm. It's a good concept, right?
Yeah. The big house isn't always a place of supernatural.
No. No, when the house itself, there's 2 worlds in our culture. There's the summertime and the wintertime. And in the summertime, it's when things are ordinary. And so we do harvesting, we do a lot of, we prepare things, we make clothing, we do all these really amazing things. And then in wintertime, because we've lived in an ordinary way, we change our names and we put winter names on. But there's a process, it's called sweeping the house, and we sweep the ordinary out of it to prepare it for ceremony. So that from one world to the next world, that's what I mean. We now go into sacred time. And what I forgot to mention is that when the winter is over, we put on summer names. So we put all our winter things away, and we allow summer to come and be summer. Right? It's a fascinating culture.
It's amazing to be able to keep track of all of it, because you have several names, I imagine, or do you?
Yeah. We can call it a play name, but my first name is Kwakwaka'wakw, which is sculpin. And I guess some people thought that my spirit was like a sculpin in the water. It's very curious. And then we'll say, as I got older, I was given a name by my dad's mother, and it's Wedlidi. And then we'll say, as I became a young man and was interested in the potlatch, I received the name Kwaguł, where coppers come from, and that was my dad's side. And then we'll say, as time went on, and my mom's side of the family got organized, and my Uncle George asked if I would step in as the head of the family, and so with it came lots of names. And so the chief name that I have from that family is Kwakwaka'wakw, which means that it's like a force that comes together to make positive change. And as a feast, if I just give feast, it's Kwakwaka'wakw, which means that you are really big smoke, you create big smoke. In other words, as a person who dances with that smoke, it's like you do so with agility. It's really cool. And then there with it comes a name, Kamkoda, which means eating songs, like eating that magic. And it's a ceremonial name. It's for a name that helps you to do ceremony and to make things blessed, And then we'll say, if there's war, my name is Kalam, which means that I can go around the world and I'll be feared everywhere. So each one, as a chief, you have a number of names that prepare you for different kinds of ceremony, for winter and summer. And you'll always have a summer ordinary name and things like that.
Do you hold those names now in perpetuity, or will you hand those names down to somebody else?
Yeah, what you do is these names will be with you until you officially hand them over to somebody else or you die. And your successor will receive those names. And what it is that when a person dies, the proper way is that that person in succession who receives those names will walk like a pathway through them, so that they'll step into maybe a small giveaway, like for giving just to small amounts of people. Yahweh is my name. Then you go for giving feast, Kwakwaka'wakw. Then you give the big eagle name that I have is called Kwakwaka'wakw, And then if you have all the other names that you do, like war or things like that, you use those. But the person will step into them and do those ceremonies, and then it makes it right. And so for a name like the eagle name, I could hand down now, and you give that to your son. And what you do is that you give away blankets, because the blankets are what hold the name in place. And that's an important thing. So it's that symbol that when you wear a blanket, it holds the warmth in, right? And so it's a really significant role that people will play. I call the eagles, and there's lots of different ideas about what an eagle chief is, but to me, the eagle chief is like the eagle. The eagle perches high above on a pole or on a tree, sees the world in a special way. But what you're doing is you're looking for, for the welfare of your children, your people, right? And you make sure they're fed, you make sure they're looked after, and it's a really big responsibility. So you're really looking after the well-being of the family.
With each name, they're also not only ceremonially or through your growth, your personal growth, there's responsibilities that go with each name, is there not? And dances. Could you explain that a little bit to me?
Yeah, and so for a member of the family is different than the chief, right? So the member of the family, when the child is born, there's a real special thing that happens is that there's usually a house built right beside the big house, and the women take care of the mom-to-be, and when the baby's born, there's a real quiet for a few days, and then the baby's introduced to, on the fourth day, to the rising sun, and then the baby's named after the village. And so if it happens to be a village like Yalise, the baby's called Yalischi. He's the big Yalise, or she's the big Yalise. And it kind of goes to that idea that it takes a village to raise a child, but reverse that. It takes a child to raise a village. So what it does is that the raising of the village in this context is that we realize that this is our future. So we really, from the time that child's born, we invest in that child. So the whole community sees that that's our future village, right? And so it's a really beautiful thing. And then we'll say, as time goes on, we had a 10-month ceremony both in Comox and E'iksan, as well as the Kwakwaka'wakw. And this is acknowledging, we'll say, that the spirit of the child wants to stay. And we really celebrate that. So we have a burning of the hair, we do the ochre and things, and we name the child, and we celebrate that.
That's the Hichlaguila?
Yeah, Hichlaguila, yeah. And then as we move forward in time, that this child begins to walk in the world in a different way, both male and females. And it's time now to give further strength to that child. They're ordinary, the uninitiated. And so we go through a ceremony of initiation. And in Comox, it's called Loxium. It means to go through. And although it's a Kwakwaka'wakw-related word, it's what they used, that word. And so the idea being that if it's a male, the men will take that person into the forest for dream time, and they find their power, and they call it Gyadas, and the Gyadas is their power, and they come back to the village, and we help that child or that young man look after that. And the female's the same, right? And they have a little different ceremony and a little different name for it, and but the women, it has to do with the strength of their hair and the strength of the power and relationship that they have with the feminine side of all life. And so I just can't remember the name offhand right now, but it's a really special name for the female rite of passage.
And is it, because this is what I'd like to discuss today, is rite of passage, and learn more about yours personally. Mm-hmm. I'm really curious as to when that happens. So that would be in puberty, I guess. Mm-hmm. That's the general ballpark. Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. So with your journey, when did that start for you? I guess because did you go through the residential school system? For me, is that I went to the Indian day school system. My brother and I, and so it meant that back up a little bit, my father went through residential school, his parents and grandparents, and so my great-grandparents went to residential school, grandparents, my father, and but my mother lived in Alert Bay, so she didn't have to go, she just stayed at home, right, and went to day school. And so in any case, what happened is that my father left his village and joined the Numgis, my mother's people. And so in a large part, so we wouldn't have to go to residential school. And so, but however, the compromise was that we all had to go to day school. And what was happening is that the kids at the residential school were all marched up rows of two up to the day school, and we had to go inside the school to attend day school. And so it was like this, we were in residential school, day school for a couple of years, every day.
And, it wasn't a very good experience. I mean, it was quite challenging for me. I was left-handed, so I was punished for that right away, and there was lots of shame around that. There was still the language issue for a lot of our relatives. It was less for us because my father made a conscious choice not to teach us the language.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, and so, but he spoke language to his mom and his brothers and sisters and things. So
Was that Kwakwaka'wakw?
Kwakwaka'wakw, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we were very aware of that. We knew enough in the way they were talking and the words that, that we understood when they were talking about us.
All the important words.
All the important words, yeah. But I think so in that, my first exposure to mentorship was probably about almost 9 years old. My grandfather was talking with my mom, and he was in our house, and he was pointing to me, and he said, he's going to go, and we're going to put him with Billy. So this was my uncle, who I then was brought onto his fish boat. And so I learned how to do things related to the fishery. And so that was the beginning part. They were teaching me how to do things. So it was like my rite of passage into an industry started really young. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty typical of my whole family.
Would your residential school kind of go through like a K to 12 kind of system?
Yep.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So you were learning to fish in the summer?
Yep, in the summer. Yeah, and so, and then with it, I did a couple of years of that, and my dad, when I was 13, said that he wanted to introduce me then to logging. And so I was underage, but I went logging and I started working in the bush. And so another form of mentorship, right? And I learned really quickly, and I quite liked it because it was very physical. I didn't really at that age understand the ramifications of what tearing down all the trees were, but but it was really physical, and I was really sports focused, and so I liked it and excelled in it. Right?
You were setting chokers and stuff like that?
By 17, I was hook tending.
Wow.
Yeah, so I really excelled in it, and so it was really interesting because I was assigned to I had a crew, and a lot of the older chaps were really awkward with that, mm-hmm. But it's just the way things were. I took it seriously. And then it was also a part of our culture at the time was soccer. And so we were mentored in soccer, and, we were supported in that. And so we were learning lots of different ways of working together and, developing certain values. And so what was good for our leisure, what was good for business and things like that, right? And of course, for a lot of us, the assimilation strategies were very successful. Church people got married in the church, and we all received church names and biblical names. Alfred, the Book of Alfred, and things like that. Right.
Did you have a biblical name?
I did. I was named after my uncle Jack Henhuse, whose real name was Alfred James Henhuse, and so I received the name Alfred James Henhuse. I mean, I loved that. I loved Jack, and I was glad to have being named after him. But when I received the name Wedlidi at a potlatch, I knew in that moment when I was old enough, I was going to legally change my name to Wedlidi. And so when that time came, it was like I went to my great aunt, and I said to her, I said, "Look, I know my uncle's passed away, but I just want to get your blessing. I don't want to be seen as being disrespectful to his name, And so she said, "Oh, he would have loved that you want to do this." And so it gave me the green light to change my name, and so I went to Wedlidi. And so anyway, when people have a lot of trouble with my name, I says, "Call me Jack." I'm named after Jack.
Because that was like your entire childhood. You were named Jack. Is that right?
No. I was named Alfred James, yeah. And so they shortened it to Al, and I was Al Speck, right? And so it was.
Interesting.
Yeah, and still the interesting part of that is that as I've grown up, there are family members. I come from a very big family. I grew up with 78 first cousins. and a huge family. And those who are very Christian call me Al, still to this day.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, and but all others call me Wedlidi.
So why is it, it sounds like your family wasn't kind of steeped in culture or practice because you couldn't be.
Yeah.
So was this in part a reclamation by your parents to support this type of thing? Or
Well, I think so, yeah, because my sense is that my mother helped facilitate getting me to the potlatch and making sure that I was there, and supported the name. She was excited that I was receiving a name, and that was really cool. And but it was interesting because she came from the Christian side of the family, and on my dad's side they were very cultural. So I had this bicultural kind of backdrop to my life, and and so the example would be I always went to my dad's mom's side for Christmas dinner first before I went to my mom's side, and so I kind of had two meals. But the my dad's mom, they always had fish. They always had what they call it zapa, which was a barbecued salmon or smoked salmon, and they had the potatoes and they had the lettuce and they had Oligan grease. So they ate that up, and so I ate enough, and I just wanted to be with them because they're so funny and very inclusive, and we always laughed. And then from there, I just had to go maybe 100 feet to my other grandparents' house, and it was a really different story. It was very, very more strict, and the less emotional. A lot more calculated, and a lot more pragmatic in how they thought about things. So it was a really good school learning, man.
No kidding. But also like having to adapt and jump back and forth in your daily life is really tricky.
Yeah.
And I imagine being raised in Alert Bay was somewhat safe, but could I be wrong about that? Like, tell me about, obviously you'd be subject to a ton of racism and things in Port McNeill, or is it? I
think for me, like my experience, my story around day school is quite different, and I don't mind sharing this, is that when I would go into school, I would get beat up, and I would be beat up on the way out. And there was one time where this one guy rubbed feces all over my face, and that was quite traumatizing for me. Like, nobody in my life ever treated me that way, right? This fella, he picked up a baseball diamond, and it was full of rocks, and he hit me on the head with it. I hit the ground and kind of lost my consciousness a little bit, and got up, and then he punched me in the nose, and and it broke my nose, right? And I was in grade 2, right? Grade 1 or 2.
Jeez.
And so I had this experience of being bullied that way, and so I didn't, with the teacher and punishing me for having the wrong hand, and I was a real daydreamer, so I got trouble for that too, right? And it was just a different system, and so I didn't have a very positive beginning to school, to learning in that way, and so I carried a lot of anxiety around that, and so to me that's all racism, and so when we moved up to the public school, one of my cousins had returned from Nanaimo, and he had an operation. He had TB. And he was being bullied, so I walked up and pallowed the guy that was bullying him, right? And it was just like, it didn't seem to matter where I went. There was this power issue, and there was a motto like, "We'll meet you behind the council hall." That's where people settled their scores and stuff. But it was, as a young person, it was like, holy geez, like that's a really rough place. And then drinking started. I started seeing a lot of violence around the alcohol, and it concerned me.
And that was you, or that was just in your family?
No, it was just in the family, and like I had one cousin who a bunch of them went to Port McNeill, and on the way back, the boat sank. And so he was just about a year older than us, and he drowned. So there was lots of alcohol-related death and recklessness, and and it seemed to be that alcohol equaled violence. That was kind of the story. So it was like we were not doing too well. And so I was pretty clear that's not what I wanted in my life. And, so, I did have my experience with alcohol, but I most certainly didn't really like it, right? And I've been a lot of years not doing it. So when I was about 24, I made a commitment to quit. And then I married, and I tried it a little bit, and then I realized I'm back at that place of saying, I really don't need this, right? Mm-hmm. And it doesn't define me, and I don't see any benefit to it, I've always been a person that says that I need to find the strength in myself, and yet I don't want to judge others and their choices. But it speaks to, like when I look at the landscape of consciousness and the landscape of action of my people and my life experience, I went away, to Mexico, to the Yukon, to Northwest Territories, and I was really in search of who I was as a person. I was really trying to find out who am I and why am I and where am I going as a, And I had this one experience of being in the Barren Lands, the Arctic Circle, and it was just me. I was there doing some geophysical surveying for Noranda, and I just looked out and I looked at the universe and I just said, like, holy smokes, I really need to get some answers here. But the only place I can go is home. The only place I can go is to ask about my culture, and that's what the revelation was for me. So I returned home and started talking with elders. And I remember one day there was a knock on the door. I opened it, and this old man, he was 86 years old. It was the late magistrate and chief, Bill Scow. And the old man looks at me, and he says, your grandfather's name was Ujis Dalis. And he says, now invite me in and make me some tea. and my cultural mentorship started in that moment.
At 24.
At 24. It was phenomenal. And,
wow.
And it was like he sat there, and he his words and his stories transcended me, right back to the beginning of who I was as a person, my ancestors, the kind of people we were, the name of our house, all these things. It was phenomenal.
So in that decision and in that choice that you made, you were given the support and you found people.
Yeah.
And how obviously that you're still learning, but tell me about that initial few years.
Yeah. Yeah. What I found was that I had a million questions, right? It's just like it was like a sponge. Yeah. I wanted to find out like what also made a man, right? Like what made a good man? What made a good leader? These are the kind of questions, and started learning about all these values and how people strengthen themselves. And it was like bathing, sitting in the mountains, visioning, all these things. So I wanted to do it. And so what I found was that I made a commitment. So I was living in Port Hardy at the time. So I used to go to the Kwaguł and bathe there. And that was a very lonely experience. No one else I knew in the Kwakwaka'wakw were doing that at the time.
Bathing by yourself.
Yep.
Just no fun.
Yeah, there's no fun. And then I moved. My dad relocated to Comox. And I was always curious about my Comox relatives. And so I moved here. And so around the same time that I moved here, within the year, I was visited by four men. And I was renting Irene Wilson's house down on Bay Street here by the cemetery. And I opened the door this one morning, and these four men, I never knew who they were. And they said, we have some gifts for you, and we would like to be invited in. And so I invited them in. Right? And so the speaker of them said to me that they'd been watching me, and they said they realized that I'm a leader, and they wanted to give me some tools to help in my leadership. And so one person was going to teach me how to use this thing called a Mododo Swan. Mododo Swan is the spirit lodge, sweat lodge, and he said that I will use that as a medicine. Another one gave me this Lakota pipe, and said I will use that as a medicine. Another person gave me the teachings of storytelling therapy, and another person, a bathing, right, the proper way of bathing. and I'd be mentored in that, and so I was. And so for years, I did that practice, but I did a 4-year commitment to bathe in the Puntledge, and then I renewed that commitment for another 4 years. And then I did the Sweat Lodge, I guess the Spirit Lodge, for about 9 years in the Youth Custody Center in Lakeview, and then a few years here in the community. When it came to storytelling therapy, I did that. I was able to use that in my work when I worked with the John Howard Society. So there was things that I was able to do, and I found through that work, I was getting stronger and stronger, and clear about who I was. I then went to Idaho, and there's a guy by the name of Kwaguł Scott. He was connected to Chief Joseph, and Kwaguł brought me down to the Black Hills, Bear Butte, and so I went on a vision quest there with a fellow by the name of Melvin Graybear and Floyd Youngman, these two gentlemen, and so when I went on that vision quest, I got a lot of answers, a lot of my questions answered, and I was able to come back. And what I saw and what I shared with my dad and others, came to fruition, and everything that I showed in my mom's side of the family, potlatch, was revealed to me at that time, 20 years earlier, right? It was really quite something.
Wow. Like, especially because you traveled somewhere else in North America to find that knowledge.
Yeah.
And what is the feeling of that today? Is it still as universal or to help each other?
Yeah, I find that the only place where there's limitations is in what I call the ordinary world of Bacchus. It's that summer concept, right? Mm-hmm. And where there's no boundaries is in the spiritual world. There's no such thing. When I was being mentored by Melvin Graybear, I'll share would say that as I went into that spirit world, I was underwater, and in underwater there's a world of blue, and when you're in that world of blue, you can see things. And where I went was a traditional big house, and in the big house is where I saw things, and I was able to see them so clear, and the order in which they were presented to me. And when I came back, I presented that to him and to my family, and then nothing. I painted it on a drum, and then it went to sleep. I just carried on with my life. And then when my uncle George phoned me and said, "I want you to be the head of our family," I was given the family story. And I was going, holy shit, this family story is the vision that I saw. And it's just like, okay.
You're connected.
Now that world has now come, the world there and this world came together as one. So it came from that world to this world, and then we shared it, right? And I think that the teachings from that have really helped me in terms of rite of passage.
Of course.
Clear. So I had to work really hard at the bathing to strengthen myself, work really hard on sitting alone in the forest, I've done 4 vision quests now, and then we'll say, it's a constant practice because you're always learning, right? And sometimes stories, for example, you start seeing things, and sometimes it's in your dreams, sometimes it's just in thoughts, or sometimes you actually see things. Careful who you tell that, though, because they have this book called DSM-4 or 5, and they think you're crazy if you, yeah.
Oh, really?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so one of the things that I had the one dream, and a relative of mine in the dream was being attacked by certain people, and it was so vivid. Like, I just woke up and I went, wow, very, very vivid. And later that day, I was invited down to a treatment center to witness a ceremony. And I call him my spiritual brother, was getting some work done. And as they were doing that work, the healer stopped and looked at me. And she looked at me right in the eye. And she says, when you have a dream and you're supposed to tell somebody something, you better do it or you're going to get sick. And I just went, whoa. So I phoned my cousin who I dreamt about and said, I don't know what you'll take of this, but these are the people that are around you that are doing some shit, right? You need to take care of yourself. And he kind of knew what I was talking about.
Is that right?
Yeah. He didn't talk details, but I just did my job, right? And those are the kind of things that sometimes, in that world, in this world, it's just important to follow through, And I think the big part of bringing that world to this world is the only way that is meaningful if there's humility, and that this isn't about ego, it isn't about status, it isn't about recruiting a number of followers. This is simply about, in your most humble way, you're going to support and help other people, right? And that's the ultimate form of leadership, right? And you keep yourself out of it, and help people. Yeah.
It's definitely something that I've been learning and benefiting from, actually, since engaging with the Indigenous community, is the practice of humility. Mm-hmm. And it's just been so rewarding. I can't even quantify it, in the sense that everything I do in the community or for the community isn't for me. Yeah. I can't have it. Right? Like it's, and that practice to me is just wonderful.
Yeah, exactly.
And so finding that in your everyday life is a really powerful tool, I think. And I think a lot of people probably in our communities would really benefit from trying that, but it's not something you can explain necessarily.
Well, yeah, and I think the big part of this is that when we're looking at strengthening people, like we've lost a lot of our rituals and ceremonies, and and the government and Canada has done a good job there. But as we bring them back, and we persevere and we keep working it, the magic returns, right? I've seen some really amazing things happen when we really drop into in a good way.
When you were, at what age did you engage with the Hamatsa Society?
Actually older, 32. Okay. Yeah. I've been.
What is the Hamatsa? Could you describe that?
Yeah. Well, the interesting part of that is that I usually like to go back to the beginning places,
Please.
And so our world is evolutionary, we have the myth world to as a genesis, and the myth world is where Kwakwaka'wakw and all the other chiefs of the myth people lived in colloquies. And then nearby lived the wolves, and up above in upper world lived the thunderbirds, and in the lower world lived Kwakwaka'wakw and the chief of the salmon. And in this world, they all possessed a certain magic, an ability, attributes. And so the wolves had a ceremony called Eater on the Ground ceremony. And there's some kind of question as to what that ceremony actually was, but it was not the Hamatsa. And some say that it was the Humtsamses, and others say it wasn't. But I have a tendency to think that from what I've learned is that it's the Humtsamses, because the Humtsamses was the ceremony of our people for thousands of years before the Hamatsa came. And we did that ceremony. And that particular ceremony is you need to go away from the village and connect to your power. And then you come back and you're brought in, you're brought in, and you dance your power, And it's no different than when you look at another culture nearby here where they have their power sticks and they do their ceremony with it. When they dance with their power, magical things can happen. And ours is like that. It's a very special ceremony. And so, but it was limited to the wolves. And so the myth people went and they found a way to basically steal it off them. One of the ways they did that was the mink created a fish trap and caught a seashell, and they put it in Village Island. They cleaned it on this rock, and then he made a mask out of it. And so he went into the house of the wolves, and they all got contorted, and through that means they were able to acquire that Eater of the Ground ceremony, and so they now could do it, right? And so there was a way that ceremony went from one group to another group, and so at some point, Kwakwaka'wakw, the chief of the myth people, says, we are going to take our costumes off to become human. And so they did, and a lot of discussion around that with the old people is that's when they became ordinary. And so they realized that they needed to go back and put the mask back on to connect to it in a spiritual way. And so they realized they do that in winter. And so that's the time in which they're connected to the power of the ceremony. And so we adopted a lot of the ceremony of the myth people. And that's where the Humtums comes from, and that's where all the other ceremonies come from. And it wasn't until, there's been a date established as 1865 is when we acquired the Hamatsa from the Rivers Inlet and a couple from the Bella Bella people, Heiltsuk. And so we know who acquired them. The head chief of the Mumptagila got his from Rivers Inlet, and the chief was, say, of the Gixsam and chief of the Wawalabai, and they got theirs was, say, from the Heiltsuk, the head family, the Raven clan. And so when they brought that in, they were tutored, we'll say, by the old Hamatsa of the Heiltsuk people and how to do that properly. And so between the Humtumsus and the Hamatsa, the essence of it is around dealing with food, dealing with hunger. And it's the idea, we'll say, that when we go through ceremony, we're taking a look at where that hunger is in the mind, where that hunger is in the heart, where that hunger is in our belly. And so the process of what I call reconciliation is that as a future leader of your family, you made peace with that. And then you can dance in a way that, or you can walk in the world in a way that you have mastered that. You've mastered your hunger. You're now living a life, we'll say, where you're a safe person in the world. You're not cannibalistic. And I think that's a really powerful concept. Yeah.
Do you treat that as a and the reason I ask is because I see now quite young children, young men, dancing Hamatsa.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to a pole raising in North Island Secondary School in Port McNeill and saw some youth dancing Hamatsa. And it was so moving that I think of it almost daily. Mm-hmm. The looks on their faces, the power that they were carrying. These were young men, mm-hmm. and I was so moved by it. And I thought, if every child could feel what these kids are proudly demonstrating right now, we'd be okay in the world. Mm-hmm. It's the amount of strength they were projecting was very, I don't know what the word is. It rocked me a bit. Yeah. And what is like? This is the component that I'm really curious about, is that this rite of passage that we have lost. I heard a report yesterday on CBC talking about how in science now, adolescence has been extended to the age of 27. Mm-hmm. And we have almost, even through our media and our culture, lost the idea of becoming a man or becoming a woman or becoming yourself is maybe a better word, not gender specific, but becoming you. We've lost this idea in our popular culture, and I think it's just so helpful. And I think that's why it was such a stark contrast to see these kids dancing in such a way that I was envious. And I felt tons of emotion because it was just so wonderful to see. And I knew that all those kids, no matter what, if whatever issue they had in the world, they would come back to that dance and they would be okay. They would find their center. They would find their ritual, like you had talked about with the bathing and the sweat lodges and definitely the community, like we have also talked about, in that you come to a certain place and you feel like, oh, it's okay here. There's no pretentiousness. There's humility all around you. And I know Hamatsa isn't for everybody. Like, not everybody can partake in that. But in the naming, there is a gift in the name, in that there is a responsibility to carry out. So there's a bit of pressure there. But also with it comes a place, and you know your place. How do you see now, like with Big House coming back and Potlatch coming back and feasting and ritual, what is the importance, or what have you seen in the culture and for children coming up?
Really good question, and I think what I've seen from the time that I was introduced to the Big House, to the Potlatch, to where I see us going as a people. There's a lot of work to be done yet, and few people realize that when I talk about the summer consciousness, the summer landscape of consciousness, that's the ordinary world, and that's the world where hierarchy lives, duality and competition, and so it's a lens in which people look through, and the other landscape of consciousness and landscape of action is where that Hamatsa is. And that's a place of the spirituality. That's a place of like kaleidoscope view, I call it. And in that lens, we look at the essence of all living things as being related to all other living things. And that there's it's like a patchwork kind of relationship where the stitches and the colors and, it's all like a web of life, right? And so that part, there's no hierarchy. There's no competition and there's no duality, just is. And so our language, when we talk about namima, people of one kind, emphasizes that. Or namatla, we have oneness on our face, emphasizes that. When we look at these Nuuchanulth, to be one with heaven, air, land, and sea, and everything in it, it does that, right? It magnifies that. It lays it out for us to challenges us to be great in that way. The other side of that, which I see a lot of right now, is that the school system that we're in is a school system that develops what I call the left side of the brain. It's the hierarchical side, mathematical, logical side, and competitive side. And all these things are dangerous to the Hamatsa. Because if you happen to be unconscious in how you are in this world, you're the best. You're the most important. And that flies in the face of humility, right? Or we'll say that you're almighty and you're all powerful, and you have this way and walk in the world where you think that people should be serving you, and you think, say that they're there for your purposes and benefit, as opposed to you being a servant to the people and that. And so our challenge is reconciling that, is being able to have cultural agility to know, we'll say, that where am I in my landscape of consciousness? And do I shift over so that I can be a humble servant, a good leader, and a kind, benevolent person, and there to help people, right? And to do so without judgment, but do so, right? And so that's the challenge. And so otherwise, we'll say what ends up happening is that as a hamata, you're going to be, he's a bad kid anyway, or this or that, right? The duality really influences how you are with your power. And, and I know sex offenders, right, who are hamatas. And those people will say harm other people. That's not hamata teaching, right? So to me is that they're in the shadow side of the training, and yet they've been trained. And so I'm very suspect of with individuals and how they are in the world. And so I've got calls, we'll say, from people who say, like, look, this particular person's doing this and this and this. And I'm not a policeman, I'm not a culture cop, but I say that, we need to help the person who's been a victim of them. But at the same time, we also need to be protective. And so, I've received calls, we'll say, from chiefs from other cultural groups, and I've said, well, I'll recommend that you need to keep your community safe. This person's not trustworthy, and I think things like that. And I think that comes down to how we're mentored, how we're taught. And, if you leave an event or a ceremony or a feast and you don't feel that you're in your heart and, you don't feel that you've been treated with respect, I would say that the host needs to spend some time learning how to be a host, and learns how to be with their hunger, right, and their power. And so we got some work to do, and I just naming it because that's what I do, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that it's hard work. It's like when you think that you're really big and smart and you're all wise, go in that river. It really humbles you. It lets you know, we'll say, no uncertain terms, we'll say, that what power is, right? And that river's the power, right? And so in our culture, when we look at the river, is that it's consciousness, and so when we go there, it's like we, it's about aligning yourself to the universe and aligning yourself with the past, the present, the future, all in the moment. And it's allowing yourself, we'll say, to be able to step into learning how to be right here, right now. And with that is aligning all the parts of yourself that is good about you and good about the world. It's really important. And and it's interesting. It's like strength from the river. There's lots of there's deep meaning in that. It's like our ancestry can offer us tremendous things. So when we talk about strengthening people, our women, need to work with their women, and they need to be the ones that we men step back and allow them to mentor and facilitate the spiritual development and strength of women, young women. And so that's what they do. We need to do that in the most majestic way, we'll say, with our young men. And we need to have our accountability systems where young men look at young women and recognize the power that they walk with and not try to steal it, right, or put it out. And that part's really important. Getting back to this notion of women's power and women's equality or women's personal authority or agency, sense of agency, that's their business, not ours. And if we understand that, then we can understand how we work with our own, and how we hold our own, and how in that humility be able to say walk with, not in front, not behind, walk with, and do it that way.
I've been doing a lot of research into the Indian Act, Constitution, things that have absolutely stripped any sense of power or self, actually, from men and women. I know that through marriage for many years, a man could marry a woman from outside, that a non-Indigenous woman, and retain status. If a woman married a non-Indigenous man, she was no longer status. Like, there's just been generations of this peeling away of this kind of removing access to culture, and the potlatch ban, obviously, which we worked together on, and the potlatch 67 work. But I'm curious as to, and I have friends, Indigenous friends, that have been adopted and raised by white parents and are just now in their 40s, trying to access the culture and not having any way to get in because they haven't been raised with access. And I imagine there's hundreds of people wanting to regain access to culture, but scared, for one, and secondly, not knowing where to start. Yeah. What do you suggest?
Well, there's lots of things that you can do. Right now, I just picked up a book the other day, and it's called Me and White Supremacy. And it's a book designed to look at the impact of all of that. It's focused on Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And there's a part of an invitation in the book. The author is Syed, and the invitation is to take a look at individuals who have been raised in supremacy, who have been kind of acculturated in that concept. And there's a 28-day program you can start looking at to start undoing that. And I say this because it's like, if we've walked a pathway of culture that is a pathway of modernity, we no doubt will be modern, right? And that modern is left brain, and that is duality, hierarchy, and competition. And the metaphors in the language that we learn are always about that. They're always about, we'll say that argument equals war, right? And, we look at, we'll say, women are lesser than men in that construct, and there's lots of things that we need to pay attention to when we've dropped into a culture style. And because when my training ground, was from childhood, from wee childhood, when I was having meals with my grandma on my dad's side, and then having meals with my mother's side. And when you look at the differences between the two, one was focused on we, the other was focused on I. You start seeing these things and the impact of culturalization, right? And so those who have been adopted or fostered or stolen in one way, shape, or form, or went to day school or residential school, they were being shaped according to the culture of the dominant culture in the country. And so we have to look at that because that's based on supremacy. That's based on the notion, we'll say, that someone is superior over another person in their thinking and the design of the culture, design of employment and design of religion, all of that somebody thinks they're actually better than someone else, right? And so in that, when our people are acculturated, they have to undo that. They have to decolonize. And that's a really tough thing to do. Like when you can't see it, you're blind to it, right? It's a blind spot.
And the system that we have been brought into, and the political system and capitalism in general. Capitalism, that is the pillar of capitalism.
Yep.
So operating within that system, we still need to survive. But maybe, I don't know, how do you delineate? Is it the summer system versus the winter system?
Well, I think we have to take a look at designing something that the first off is I usually like when I spent time working with John Howard Society and I do some storytelling therapy is that someone comes to see you for a reason, right? They've got some problem-saturated story. And so the person who's been fostered or, we've been acculturated, it's not working for them. So what's really important is for you as a helper and you as a teacher or you as a mentor is to invite them to take a look at where they were recruited and what are the stories they recruited to that have given them problems. And it could be, say that in that story is that you have to be the Iron Man, Maybe the story would say is that you have to be hand the responsibility for your confusing feelings over to somebody else, in a codependent kind of way. There's some story there. And so when we take a look at those things, then we begin to invite them to take a look at there's an alternative, right? What would it be like if you were responsible for your own feelings? What would it be like, say, if you were to say, I don't want to be competitive? What would you say if it was, looking at this is that maybe I want to work for a co-op rather than a competitive small business? There's lots of options, but what happens, though, in the capitalist system, it's my way or the highway. It's the right way. It's all these things emphasize, recruit you to the idea that if you aren't with me, you're against me, right? And so here what we do is that in this way of thinking is that we can look at some kind of a bicultural way, and it opens up possibilities of seeing things really differently, that you don't have to do that. Who says, right? So you've got to create some dissonance in that. You have to be able to say that, look, I don't have to listen to you. I can check this out for myself. Is it really my choice, or I'm being recruited, or have been recruited, or am I being bullied into believing in the system, right? And it's just like pretty amazing when you think that there's all kinds of possibilities in the world, because when you're in black and white duality, Trump, for example, in the elections in the States, he has no alternative in the way he's thinking is to say that they cheated, right? There's no other way.
Because he'll never lose.
Yeah. Losing to him would be too great. And I think oftentimes that's what happens when our Indigenous people drop into a competitiveness, is that their identity is wrapped up in winning. So therefore, when they lose, they get into trouble. They get into fights and they do all this other stuff, right? And so the idea being that when we're culturalized, we can say that, it's a game. I'm going to play. If we win, we lose. We had a good time doing it. I would have preferred to win, but, there's some learning in that, right? And so it's really interesting because when we're looking at, the whole decolonization effort that we're trying to make is that we want people to understand, say, where they come from, who they are, and as a people where we're going. We are in the midst of reclaiming our culture. We are in the midst, we'll say, of healing our nations. We are in the midst, we'll say, of making our names great again, right? And I think that we're not anywhere near close to that yet. We have a lot of work to do. The one thing I will say in terms of one of the byproducts, we'll say, of colonization is the lateral violence in our communities. And that is that, people are confused about their story and they don't even know how to contextualize that story and they're afraid. And so when someone comes in and offers them a pathway, they attack that person. They attack the person because they're afraid of the change, because they're gaining some power in the crazy, right? That there's some reward in keeping this crazy, right? And so I think that is really important to be aware of, is that when we're trying to communicate that we want to go back to the way our people were before, loving one another, caring for one another, sharing power together, sharing space together, like being people of one kind, Like, why is it that you want to always be the chief? Right? We have a person who's a chief, and if the person is supported in the most humble way, that person will be humble, right?
And seeing that chief, that being a chief is a very difficult job. Yeah. So if done right.
It's a very difficult job, but it's a rewarding job in the sense that you get up and this is simply about problem-solving stuff and helping people, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not about, it's not personal. Like I'm not fighting you because of who you are. What I want you to do, invite you to do, is to think about the choices you're making and how that choice affects other people. And if that decision you're making, say, is really harmful to other people, I want to mirror that's what's going on. Because the invitation to responsibility, I can't force you, right? But I can invite you. And if the invitation lands in a good way and you decide to do things differently, then, boy, we all benefit from that, right? And that part's really important.
So if there are people out there, how do you suggest they move forward into getting an invitation?
Yeah. Well, I think it goes back to our leadership, like hereditary chiefs. It goes back to our leadership. It's like when I remember the old man Bill knocking on my door, what he taught me in that millisecond, when I opened that door, I realized that he saw something in me, and the mentorship that he saw. He also wanted me to know, how important it was for elders to reach out. What he was saying, that although he was a big chief, he was a magistrate, he was a political leader, international advocate, that he wanted to tell me that I was important. And I think that's important. So when we go and we see things are happening, we can't hesitate. We have to go and say, I see things happening. We have to reach out to say, I'd like to mentor you and looking at this a different way. And that part's really important. And we can do it a lot of ways. Like sometimes, we can make videos and small clips, and we have sound bites, we can do it in such ways when people see it and it's safe for them to think about stuff. We want them to think about stuff. And in thinking about stuff, we want them to reflect on it. We want them to connect on it and then be able to do something with it. Because I don't believe that these individuals who are drunken with hierarchical power really want to be that way. I think that they want to be able to say that I want to be involved, right? And so how do I be involved? And I think with us is that if we step into that world of duality, we say, okay, I'm just gonna beat them, and then things will be okay. No, it's not. You just beat them, and all you do is perpetuate the divide, right? So the idea is that how do we create a forum where you actually can say to people who are energized to say, let's channel that energy. Don't go away. Stay in. Let's have these conversations, and let's do this work together. Like we have to put that energy toward the kids. And when I think about the women who had that house beside the big house, who supported the mother, who sang songs to that newborn, who went and introduced that newborn to the sunrise after the fourth day, who introduced the child to the clan, all of these things is that says to me, will say that they had a vision that it took a child to raise the village, right? We remember that that the words that we use, like Kwaguł, that you're my reason for living, that was for a reason. Or a grandmother whose name was Kwaguł is like, you're so important, I'm like a slave to you, right? Like we're investing in that child. That child, our future is everything. And somehow we've lost sight of that. And because it's more about me. And I think, quite honestly, and when we think about the current crisis of COVID, is that we've got a generation of people who don't give a shit about old people right now. 97% of people that are dying are the elderly. And so it says to me is that we've got to, come back as a species here and reset, to come back to say what are the important things. Like we want to be looking at the children. We want to be going through rite of passage with our teens so they use their power correctly. We support them in that use and so forth, right? And it's not complicated in that way. It's not confusing in that way. It's really simple. Our way was created by the Creator and laid down by our ancestors. It was marked out by them. And so if we just see that and we follow that pathway is a beautiful way. We can help our children who are confused. We can help our adolescents who need some focus. We can offer support to our parents who got healing to do, right? And, and so we need to constantly be aware of and tap into how much of the acculturation has taken place. And so offering ways to decolonize that, and just if I could say the one thing that I like to do around that is when I'm hosting a meeting, I tell people that the really first and most important thing that I do is I ask myself, how am I being a host today? How am I hosting me? How am I showing up? Am I open? Am I willing? Am I courageous? Am I humble? Right? And that's me. Then I have to ask, how am I hosting you? Am I warm, kind? Am I welcoming? Am I really open to hearing you? Right? And then when you speak, how am I your guest? Am I able to drop into being a really open and a learning guest, right? And so when you see that in me, that I value you. I'm a damn good host and I'm a damn good guest. And so when we finish our work, then we have this understanding that we've journeyed together in a good way. And I think when it's like that kind of hosting is artful, and we really need to do that. I used to really love going to my cousin Wayne's place, and we would go visit, and they call it Bogwins. And so Bogwin Sapa is when you visit back and forth. But that's when we go have some tea and we have some homemade bread with jam, But it was like, it's like you establish like a connection and you foster that connection, and you let each other know how important you are to each other, right? And that's really powerful stuff. And we don't do that. So part of the colonization is one person, one vote, one people, right? Well, one nuclear people. And we need to open that to namima. And that has to be our work.
Something that, I've been learning so much in the, relatively short life that I've had with the Indigenous peoples. And it's become a huge part of my life now. Mm-hmm. It's always in my thoughts. It's always present. And to me, it's been the biggest gift.
Yeah.
And, I had many kind of crucibles and, the young man's journey, and I've had quite an odyssey of life so far. And I've been very fortunate that way. But there were always things that I was never able to explain until now. Yeah. And I just had a conversation the other day with some people, and about when I was 7, I spent a lot of time in the forest, and my parents, I lived a very old school childhood, so I was raised in the forest, and I never came back until the sun went down, and then I'd eat dinner. My parents just kind of let me roam free. So I was very fortunate in that. But I used to spend a lot of time by myself in the forest. And one day, I saw a wolf in the forest. And it was a white wolf. And I didn't fear it. It just kind of ran across the forest and stopped and looked at me and ran away. And I thought, that's pretty weird. And I went into my tell my mom because I was petrified of bears. And bears used to come to me in my dreams and talk to me. And I always thought that I was connected to a bear spirit. And it wasn't until the other day that I was talking about this with Carver and his family. And that I was like, when I told my mom, she said, well, there's no wolves. There's no wolves in the forest. And, there are wolves on Vancouver Island. There's definitely not that wolf. And I just was always never had a way or anybody to talk about. And I buried that until then. And now in having talked about that, I still have no idea what it means or what it, am I nuts? Or like you were saying, right? Yeah. Like get the book out. But to me, what's interesting is that there are no boundaries, like you say. And in the learnings and in the practice and in the ritual, I mean, I can't wait to get back in the big house.
Yeah.
That to me is bizarre. That 20 years ago, that would be never something that would even cross my mind. And yet there is such a peace inside, a safety, an allowance to be your full self.
Yeah.
That cool. I miss that. I feel like, I need to be in there. And even now, we went in a couple of weeks ago and it was like, you could kind of just relax.
Yeah. That's cool.
And I just think it's such a gift and just the beginning for me. Yeah. And it's definitely something that, I want to surround myself in, on a daily.
Yeah.
And I just see the benefit, and I look at my own children who are being brought up in a very, more of the capitalistic society, like we were talking about, and they're not really sure. They're just walking around unsure of themselves constantly. And when they assert themselves in a way, they're reprimanded for that. And because we live in a dangerous world, or a perceived dangerous world, and there's, creeps driving around the neighborhood, and there's, I'm just perpetually on them, and it's not fair. And when I relate it back to my own childhood, I wasn't, I was at the age of 10, I have a daughter now who's just turned 11, but I mean, at the age of 10, I was digging snow caves and living in, sleeping in snow caves up in Strathcona Park. And, she has trouble making a bagel.
Yeah.
So the rite of passage for me has become very personal now, because I need to design that resilience and bring that resilience into their lives so that they can exist. And I'm not alone. Yeah. We've got a whole generation of little COVID survivors here that are coming through this thing that aren't allowed to move. And if they can move spiritually, that would be something, at least, right? Or find an environment of no boundaries, and yet be, like you say, have a mentor, have somebody that comes and guides them through this process and this difficult process, as opposed to reprimanding them every time they move.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly. Got a question for you.
Yeah.
What month were you born?
August,
eh? And so when you thought like your connection to the bear, where did that come from?
From my dreams.
Okay.
So we had bears coming through I backed onto Seal Bay Park when I was where I grew up, and so we were kind of on a bit of a bear highway, and we had black bears in the backyard all the time. And one night, a black bear got into our garbage, and my dad, we didn't know what it was, and he went out and he ended up shooting the black bear because he was within about 2 feet of it, and it was coming at him. And And that really impacted me as a kid. And he actually, we tanned the hide of that bear, and it sat in our house. And so it was a constant reminder. And whenever I was playing in the forest, which I had, built my fort, and I everything was based around bears, all of my play. And when the bears would come to me in my dreams, they would usually chase me for a moment, and then I would turn, and there would be a moment of, I've just got to stand. Mm-hmm. And then the bears would stand up on their hind legs, and they would talk. And they would say, you don't come in here anymore. And things like this.
Yeah.
Right? And I would have conversations. Well, the bears kind of followed me until I was about 30. Mm-hmm. I would have dreams. And it was more about the passage of going through the forest path. And there was always this threat, existential threat of this. And it was funny how it occupied me as a child. And it kind of rode with me. And then it went away. And the bears never appeared in my dreams again until I had kids. Yeah. And because they would come to me and they would try and chase, and I'd be standing tall. And I was like, yeah, bring it on, baby. And they would stand, and they said, you might be able to face us, but he can't. And I would look down, and my son would be standing next to my leg. And I would remember a particular dream where I picked him up. He was just 3, I think. I picked him up, and I walked away from the fight. And when I woke up, that to me was when I realized, I kind of came into my own as a father, that I wouldn't engage. I would keep safe as a priority. I would keep my family safe first. And that was kind of the lesson I gained from that experience. But even talking about that type of thing is not something that I do freely.
Well, there's a reason I ask, right? And, so part of, the spiritual world, like what I call the dream world, myth world, is that, we have the sacred circle. That circle is the same circle that we dance on the floor. And if we're so lucky to still sweep the floor clean, then we're able to step into the spiritual world. And when we're in that world has some gifts for us. And I just call it a sacred circle. The sacred circle is a way of looking at things where February, March, and April is kind of like the east part of it. And there's the eagle. So when you're looking at February, March, and April, there's fire, there's life, there's new beginnings. And May, June, July is the deer, where it's about harvesting, it's about life, it's also about giving, about sharing wealth. And then August, September, October is the west, and that's autumn. That's the dropping leaves time, and that's the bear. And then you have November, December, January, which is the white wolf. And so when we look at all of these the ways of the world and the universe, they come to us to teach us many things, right? And so the personal totem, I would say, would be the bear. And there's some magical things in there, because the bear is also a place of bear cave. They're the oldest of the culture people. And, when the idea of the clan of the cave bear came from that. And it's like there's lots of medicine in it, and there's a lot of leadership in it. And when you, I was fine with say that the bear at a certain point tears the ego apart. And when you tear the ego apart, it's where you find your true self. And that true self is very wise. And, and so when you the idea of sometimes when you run away from your power, you have to stop and face it. And when you stop and face it, then there's a synthesis that takes place, right? And then we'll say, the idea that we are always moving. And so we're always visiting all the directions. And sometimes we'll say when the white wolf comes, the white wolf sits in a place in the universe that's between rebirth and death. It's that liminal space. We call it in between, in betwixt. And so in that place is that when you're looking at the universe, you're seeing the leaves drop off and the bears going into hibernation. You're looking at that, and then you're looking over here and you're seeing, well, that's all the new beginnings place. Things will all sprout. It's a really amazing place. But in the space that you are, the space of that wolf, is the coming of the masculine and feminine energy that produces new things. So in the universe is a life force, we'll say, that just brings in the creative spirit, right? It's like as a man and woman get together to germinate the beginning of a child, so too other things, mind, heart, and then it shows itself in spring. Everything has a birth. Everything has maturity. Everything has a death. And when we come back to the liminal space again, we come back into that recognition that a lot of celebration around that. But it's also a celebration of what comes next, right? How do we deepen it? It's like, the time we'll say when the children were first born, you're probably scared shitless. It's like there's no manual for being a father. And so as you go around that wheel over and over and over, you find some comfort, some confidence, and still there's vulnerability. I heard you say about, the dream of the bear with, you could handle yourself, and it recognized that, but your child, right? And there's two parts to that. What I see in that is that there's a part of your child that's not ready for that, right? And so your physical child may not be ready, but that's next. There's still that child. Mm-hmm. And so when you come to that place of knowing, we'll say that that's not that child's business. The child is just to be free. What you need to do is to play with that inner child a bit more, and embrace that inner child a bit more, and to know that that child will always have connection to you as an adult, And then we'll say when that happens, then you're a lot more fun.
Thanks, man.
But there's a part, we'll say, when there's a disconnect between our inner children and ourselves, where there's a loneliness that happens. And that real deep loneliness, that sense of disconnect, starts to change, and we start feeling a lot more whole. And it's just play, like we're gifted the opportunity as men would say to have children. And when we play with those children, we're playing with that child.
Right.
And just the relationship is magnificent. But I would pay attention to wolf right now.
Yeah.
And what I would do is that bring it to your life. Make sure we'll say that white wolf is a picture somewhere, or,
right.
Just some of that. And so it's white wolf is about wisdom, spend time with water, and spend time with crystals, and I don't go high around with crystals, but, but there's something powerful about the nature of wolf and crystals. They are the ones that work with that in a healing way. And so what you do is I would say that if you have worries about your heart, I would just put crystals in the water and have it nearby, and just to say that I'm going to call on, I'm asking a wolf as a healer to come be with me right now, and that's a powerful thing. And spend time, if you're stressed out, go along the river, go down the beach.
I do live on the river, so
yeah,
it's helpful.
Great. Yeah, and do that, and just because we talk about like one of the things that when the wolf people came down, they brought crystals. They work with that, and we value that, And out in the West Coast, a killer whale came up on land, transformed into a wolf, and they had crystals, and so their use of crystals were. They were able to send messages, we'll say, to other chiefs to come to have a feast with them. Amazing stuff.
Wow.
And it's just that level of telepathy, development. And it's we were way better at that before, and we've lost that. Mm-hmm. A lot of the old stories they talk about being on the back of raven, and you don't speak in that world. It's all done by telepathy. And I remember, say, when I was on my vision quest in Bear Butte, it was that way, you know. I never said a word, but I did. I was talking all the time, you know, listening all the time, listen, you know, and you know, and so I think that's a really important part. And so just knowing, we'll say that sometime the eagle will come, and sometime the deer will come, you know, and all these things, just pay attention to it. And it's like you doing it already. You're looking for the lessons, and those lessons will help you, right? Mm-hmm. And there's other things too. Is that what? If there are other animals or other birds or things like that, we say that there's 12, you know, and there's one core one in the center. And so you,
right,
yeah. So when people
like the ravens, we had 2 ravens that kind of lived in the trees. Yeah. They're still there.
Yeah,
I mean they're probably different ravens, but they're still there in the same place. Yeah. And they used to sit right over my fort and carry on all day long.
Yeah.
And it's funny when I go there because they're still there at my parents' place.
Yeah. Well, when we moved into this house, we were driving the big truck in, and we counted them. There were 11 ravens.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and when we stopped, they were all in the trees, kayaking, you know. They stayed there until we unloaded. And when we left with the truck, they left except for 2, and the 2 stayed here for 4 days, and it was like, this is really eerie and it's really cool, you know. Yeah, it's fascinating.
It's so wild.
Yeah, and so Pa'akimos is what we would call this house, right? Raven on front, you know, but we have a raven up there.
You do, okay.
Yeah,
I see you've got your raven.
Yeah, and that's just to acknowledge, we'll say that, you know, that happened, right?
Right.
It's magical.
Yes.
Yeah. And when, there's been really neat things like that we've paid attention to. When Deidre and I got together and we made our commitment to one another, we went on top of a mountain. And what we did is that we made a big sacred circle, and with stones and prayer and blessings. And we just had these kind of commitment vows that we were saying to one another. And one eagle landed in a tree behind me and one behind her. And they were talking while we were doing that.
Wow.
And it was just like magical, you know, and when it was finished, they flew off, you know, and it was just like, couldn't be better, you know. It was really neat. And so when I remember that, is that we were married a year later, but it was like, we really didn't need to do that, you know, because that was already sanctioned.
Yes.
Yeah, but it was nice.
Well, it's nice for everyone else.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. But in any case, you know, so I think that world is a really good world, and it sounds like you're already tapped into it. And so just sort of, you know, just work with that a bit more. And that's really neat.
Well, Wedlidi, thank you so much for your wisdom, your stories, your articulate way of presenting things. I kind of often, whenever we talk, I feel like we could just talk infinitely, and I think that's a really important quality in the friends that I keep. And you're such an important person in my life for that, and so thank you for sharing.
Well, thank you, Zach, for creating the space for us to have this conversation. I think that you host conversations really well, and you know, I think by inviting, you're very curious and very open, and as a student of life, right? And I think that allows us all to grow and all to learn. And I think we need a lot more conversations with lots of more people. And, you know, and with that, you know, like the myth people stories, is create a world in which we understand what the world is about and how we can support a transformative experience with it. And that we can actually have a place where we learn from those experiences and that transformation. And we can find ourselves in a place where we're okay to being different, you know. We're allowed to be ourselves, and we're allowed to not know. We can fail safe. We can do all these things that are really important, to be in the world. So I just raise my hands to you, my friend. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Gila Gixsam.
Gila Gixsam.
Yeah.
Ala Gixsam.
Allah Gixsam.
That certainly went in some directions I wasn't expecting. I am looking forward to the next discussions, and I hope you do too, and join me there. I'm looking so forward to hearing your thoughts, your feedback, your own experiences with this knowledge, or with knowledge around the topic. Yeah, thanks so much for joining. Your support means the world to me. Until the next one, I'm Zach. Keep your fire hot.